Raise your hand if you have ever frozen in a technical interview on a tool that you use every single day. That was me. Earlier this month, I sat down for a live build interview at a company I genuinely wanted to work at, and they asked me to build a calculated column in Power BI. A calculated column is something that I have done hundreds of times at different companies I worked in a production environment, and I froze. I basically didn't blank completely, but I second guessed myself and I fumbled. And I could feel the energy in the room completely shift. I didn't get the role in the end. And in this video, I am going to tell you exactly what I did after that, how I audited my own gaps and built a focused 6-day study sprint and passed the Microsoft PL-300 Power BI Data Analyst Associate certification. I walked out actually knowing my stuff much better than I did going in. Now let's get into the video. So before I get into the system, let me give you some context because I think it matters. I am not technically a beginner. I have been using different data visualization tool in my experience in BI analytics, and I've built dashboards in Power BI for enterprise clients. And I have worked with direct query on multi-terabyte data sets in Google Cloud Platform, and I've also set up row level security for complex hierarchies. So when I bombed that interview, it wasn't a knowledge problem on the surface, it was more of a fluency problem. There's a difference between knowing how to do something because you have done it in your specific work context and knowing it with enough to explain it and build it from scratch under pressure in an unfamiliar environment with someone overlooking or watching through your shoulders. So that distinction changed on how I studied for PL-300. I didn't study to pass a test. I suddenly started understanding how to rebuild fluency, explainable, structured, pressure-proof understanding, and that's what I want to walk you through today. The step one I have considered myself in audit is to treat your gap like a data problem. After that interview, I sat down and did something that I've never done before a certification attempt. I wrote down every single moment in that interview where I hesitated, where I second guessed, where I gave a vague answer instead of a sharp one, and I categorized them. For me, the gaps were specific to DAX, RLS, Power Query, and visual interaction. I knew the functions, but I couldn't always articulate why I was choosing one over the other. For example, last date versus last non-blank, calculate versus calculate table. I have used them at work, but I couldn't really explain the decision logic clearly. The second was the RLS setup sequences. I have implemented row level security in production, but when asked to walk through these setup steps from scratch, I fumbled the order. Third was the Power Query transformation pattern, M code, merge types, and custom columns. I've used these, but I haven't systemized them. In an interview, someone asks you to describe a transformation step and you want to answer them in a 10-second and not fumble around and say it by 45 seconds, right? And the fourth was visual interaction behavior, such as cross filtering versus cross highlighting, edit interactions, and I've done this again at hundreds of times clicking through the UI, but explaining it precisely was little tough. That audit took me about 30 minutes and it was the most valuable 30 minutes of my entire prep, because now I wasn't studying Power BI, but I was basically studying my gaps. Section 2, I wanted to focus on building a sprint, not on a broader review. So I gave myself 6 days, not because that's the right number for everyone, but because I had a real deadline. I needed to be honest about my timeline. So here's the exact step that I've taken to structure it. The days 1 and 2, I started out with diagnostic practice test first. I went on straight to Syed Parvez PL-300 course on Udemy, and specifically the practice test. They consisted of five practice tests with 1 case study questions, and my first attempt was attempting all the tests without watching a single video lecture first. Why? Because I wanted to see where I actually stood, not where I thought I stood. So I went through each questions I got wrong and then wrote down those topics and focused on the topic and the concept behind it. This gave me a ranked list of weak areas to attack for passing or understanding the PL3. Days 3 and 4, I targeted Microsoft Learn. I went into Microsoft Learn and worked on the modules that mapped into my weak areas, and not the full learning path, just the gaps This is important because if restudying and learning the topics that you already know may feel like you're productive, but studying those that you don't know, that makes what improve your whole foundation. So for DAX specifically, I focused on the time intelligent functions and filter context. For RLS, I built a sample model from scratch in Power BI desktop and walked through a full setup like creating roles, writing the DAX filter, publishing and testing with views as role, and doing it with my hands. Day 5, I compiled 109 multi choice questions focused specifically on the areas that show up mostly in the PL-300 exams, such as the workspace roles and permissions, report versus dataset level, RLS, Power Query transformation, visual types, and when to use them, and gateway setup, configurations, etc. While I was attempting those questions, I timed myself. I forced myself to justify every answers out loud, not just by selecting an option. This is the closest thing that you can do to personate yourself in an interview pressure that you can manufacture at home. And day 6, I re-attempted the complete practice test from Udemy and reviewed the set of questions that went wrong then. And section 3, I wanted to highlight on the specific concepts that changed everything. So let me walk through the specific concepts I've drilled hardest, because those are the ones that came up in the exam and in interviews. The concept 1 was last date versus last non-blank. Both are basically time intelligent functions. Both return the last date, but they behave differently. For example, last date returns the last date in the current filter context. It always returns a single date value, while a last evaluates an expression and returns the last date where their expressions is not blank. So if you have a sparse data, if not every date has a value, last non-blank gives you the last date where something actually happened, and last date just gives you the last date in a period regardless. So in a real scenario, this mostly happens in an inventory tracking, balance sheet calculations, and that distinctions matters enormously. Concept 2 that I focused were row context versus filter context in DAX. This one breaks a lot of people, and it broke me too, because row context is what happens inside a calculated column or an iterator function like SUMX. It evaluates expression row by row, while a filter context is what happens in a measure. It's shaped by slicers, visual filters, or any page filters, etc. on the report. For example, calculate is a function that transitions between them. It takes a row context and converts it into filter context. Once you understand that, so many DAX patterns becomes more easier to understand. I wrote this out and I drew diagrams and I built them in the Power BI desktop. The third concept I focused were on the workspace roles. There are 4 roles in total: admin, member, contributor, and viewer. Admin has the complete control. The admin can add and remove people, including other admins. Members can publish, update content. Contributor can publish and update content but cannot manage permissions. And a viewer, as everyone knows, it's more of a read only and can only interact with reports but cannot edit it. The exam will give you a scenario and ask which role is appropriate. So knowing the boundary between a member and a contributor is really important. And concept 4 was report level versus dataset level, row level security. Row level security defined in Power BI desktop sits at the dataset level. So it applies everywhere that dataset is used and every report built on it. So you can also configure RLS in a Power BI service at a dataset level, but if someone has built permission on a dataset, they can also potentially bypass report level filters. So this is more of a governance question, not just a technical one, but it also comes up in the exam. The fifth concept is a cross-filtering versus cross-highlighting. Filtering removes data from other visual entirely. For example, if you click on a bar in a bar chart, the visuals filter down to only show related data. However, cross-filtering keeps all the data visible but dims the unrelated portion, so it shows a context. So you control this per visual using edit interaction. Knowing them when to use and being able to explain why is also a key difference between a technical answer and a practitioner answer. So now let me talk you through the exam day and what surprised me during the exam day. So on May 21st, I went on to the exam center. The questions were predominantly scenario based, not just by definition. They don't ask what is calculation, what is last non-blank do. They give us a business questions and or a situation and ask which function or approach solves this. So that's why studying to explain things, not just recalling them, matter a lot. The Power Query questions were more detailed than I expected. For example, transformation steps, merge types, handling errors. If you have only used the UI and never looked at M code behind it, I think you might most probably struggle during the exam. And the report design questions, like such as accessibility, mobile layout, choose the right visual, are worth more attention than most study guides give them. So in the end, I was able to pass the exam, and I honestly think the result mattered less more than what I've done during the sprint for my fluency. And I came out being able to explain DAX filter much better in a context way, and being able to walk through the RLS setup without hesitating. And that's what I should have done in going before to these interviews. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Failing a technical interview on something that you have used every day is not a skill problem. It's basically a fluency problem, and fluency is fixable with a system. So auditing your actual gaps, not an assumed gap, building a sprint around those gaps specifically, and practicing explaining, not just recalling them, and doing it with your hands, like building the thing and not just reading about it. Those few steps helped me to build a solid certification for PL-300. If you are studying for PL-300 right now, or if you have been putting it off because you think your work experience is enough, I hope this gives you a useful framework. Drop your questions in the comment section. If you want me to go deep dive in any of these DAX concepts I've covered, like filter context, time intelligence, calculate, let me know. I can make that video. And subscribe if you want more honest, experience based content on data careers and tools.